Transgender swimmer Lia Thomas's 2024 Olympic dreams are over. This week, Thomas's challenge against rules that stop her from competing in elite women's races failed. The Court of Arbitration for Sport dismissed Thomas's request for arbitration with the World Aquatics governing body. For context, World Aquatics banned transgender women who have been through male puberty from competing in women's races. Thomas had asked the sports court to overturn the rules, saying they were invalid, unlawful, and discriminatory. Thomas, who was the first transgender woman to win an NCAA swimming championship, called this week's ruling deeply disappointing. In a statement provided by her legal team, Thomas said, quote, "Blanket bans preventing trans women from competing are discriminatory and deprive us of valuable athletic opportunities that are central to our identities. The CAS decision should be seen as a call to action to all trans women athletes to continue to fight for our dignity and human rights." And so I know this got so much attention that Lia Thomas, she's dominating women's swim, but actually 27 records were broken at the NCAA swim championships this past year. And Lia Thomas didn't break a single one. I just wish we could focus on women's sports wins. That's crazy to break 27 records and to be focusing on someone whose time in so this was 2022, her March 21st time was not even in the top 50 of all time. And in the last 9 years, she would not have won this meet in 6 out of 9 of them. So she's still very much, competitive with the other women, but by no means is dominating in the sport. And I think we should focus, on the records that are broken rather than her performance.
But if we compare to Lia Thomas's times to Will Thomas's times, which was what he went as when he identified as a man, we see that someone who was incredibly mediocre and actually not a very good swimmer now becoming competitive in the women's category because of the biological advantage that he has over his peers. And I think it's important that the women who are participating in these events are often losing opportunities because of male participation. So, for example, someone who might have finished 4th or 5th in a race would be unable to go to a Division I championship meet, or they would be left off of the podium if Lia Thomas finished in 2nd or 3rd, or in one case in the 500-yard freestyle, actually he did win the Division I title. So there is an unfairness here that I think is quite obvious, and I think the World Aquatics organization made the right decision. Now, I think what's interesting too is that the World Aquatics group did create an open category for transgender swimmers to compete in to avoid this unfair competition in the Swimming World Cup, and no entries were received. Not a single transgender athlete signed up to participate in that open category. They only wanted to compete in the category where they had this biological advantage as a man competing against women. So, I mean, I don't know what else the World Aquatics group can do here to try to be more accommodating to transgender swimmers.
I really appreciate Skylar Baylor's opinion on all of this. Skylar was recruited to the Harvard's women's swim team when, he was in high school, and was, biologically, or not biologically, but was a cisgender woman at the time, and then decided to transition and become a man. And so decided to change and be a part of the Harvard men's swim team and competed for 4 years there. And I think, when we draw upon his perspective on Lia Thomas, is this analysis of, sure, she's been an athlete since she was 5 years old. She's worked very hard on all of this. And we can't really compare, her record as she matures as an athlete to her record earlier in her career, right? Usually athletes, the more they train, the more official coaching they have, the better they get. And when someone transitions, we find that they lose a lot of, some of the strength given to them through the testosterone hormones in their body. And that when you take the hormones to transition and you receive the hormone therapy, that a lot of the same, athleticism that's afforded to you from the testosterone diminishes. And so there's significant changes where after 1 year of hormone therapy, we see studies show that the push-up times and all sorts of strength tests are completely gone, any advantages of someone who is naturally, born a male. And then we see after 2 years, the time that someone takes to run and do sort of these, fastness tests diminishes, but we still see a difference of about 12%. So maybe a few more years is necessary. But I do think this kind of, blanket ban of no one who went through puberty is limiting, because a lot of kids don't have their minds fully made up about gender until after puberty. They don't take the puberty blockers. And so does that mean they never get to compete in athletics? Because as you said, there's just not enough transgender athletes to justify, their own category, not to mention the differences between, a male to female transition and a female to male transition competing with each other. It just doesn't make much sense. So I would like to see them really look at the science and get precise about what the requirements are in terms of, someone who transitions, how long they have to be in the hormone therapy.
Yeah, I mean, even if we consider that hormones can potentially reduce athletic performance to a certain percentage, which I've looked at those studies and I'm not super convinced by them, to be honest with you. And we can get into the reasons why in a different debate. But we also know that puberty does confer natural biological advantages to men that can't be diminished by hormones. For example, things that are incredibly relevant to swimming are things like height, wingspan, shoe size, hand size, all of these things that can make someone much more dominant in the water. And I think it is relevant to compare Will Thomas to Lia Thomas, because there's only about a year difference between when Lia Thomas decided to transition and swim for the women's team versus when he was swimming for the men's team. And yet we see him placing incredibly differently between those two groups. I mean, all we have to really do to determine that this is unfair is we can look at the world record times for men in any sport really, but certainly swimming because it's relevant here, compared to the world record times for women. The world record times for men are always going to be faster than the world record times for women. Of course, we can say that on an individual level, there are going to be some professional female swimmers who are faster than just a random dude you pick up off the street. But if we're doing a proper comparison of a professional male swimmer versus a professional female swimmer, the professional male swimmer is going to be faster if they're competing at the same level. And when you put those two in the same category, you're freezing out women of the potential to have these opportunities to win. That was really a big part of the reason why Title IX was created in the first place. And one of the other issues outside of the fairness of competition that came up with Lia Thomas's inclusion on the University of Pennsylvania women's swim team was that his teammates were not consulted about him changing in the locker room with them. A lot of them felt very violated by the fact that they did not have to give consent in order for him to be exposing his male genitalia to them. One of the swimmers on that team, Paula Scanlon, testified to the fact that she was a prior victim of sexual assault. And so she was actually terrified of being in the locker room with someone who was a biological male who still had all of his male parts. And when people on the team complained about this, they were told that they were the problem and they were the ones that were going to need accommodations in a separate locker room, as opposed to requiring Lia Thomas to change somewhere else. So this is more than just an unfairness question, but also a question about women's boundaries, consent, and their ability to have sex-segregated spaces to make them feel safe and comfortable.
Yeah, I don't know, as someone who was on a college sports team and has changed with women in the locker room, I mean, some of the women are gay, some of the women are looking at other women sexually, but not in a locker room, not when you're, playing, a sport together. And it's not like in the locker room, people are just walking around naked, imposing themselves on others. Sometimes when you're at certain meets, there are showers that are communal, but people respect each other's privacy on the team. And so, everyone's genitalia looks different. Someone who's transitioning or has already transitioned rather is no longer a man. So also to compare the sports, times, whether we're talking track, we're talking swimming, where we have apples to apples comparisons of what's your time for this amount of distance completed, we can't compare a transgender woman to a cisgender man and say we expect these to be the same. In the same way, we can't compare, a cisgender man and a cisgender woman and say, look at this difference. This means everything. Because when someone transitions, they're not the same as a cisgender man. They are now a transgender woman. And so we can't make those comparisons and say this is why it's unfair. We have to really be precise about the science. Are there physical advantages? Are there athletic advantages? And at what point do we see that those diminish? Because as someone who played college sports, there are a lot of men who were on the men's college lacrosse team who were shooters in the same position I was, and I was better than them. And so even people who are, biologically, cisgender, and they're competing in the sport among peers who are women or who are men, we still see that I could dust dudes who have never received any kind of hormone therapy to equalize the playing field. And so to me, it just feels like we have to be fair to some degree, and banning athletes who have gone through puberty of the opposite gender at this point in time when we have the technology to make those changes, it does feel unfair.
We are completely out of time, but I would just encourage you to listen to the testimony of some of the women who were in the locker room with Lia Thomas, because they said that is precisely what happened, that he was attempting to show off and was not giving them the privacy that they deserved by being in there, and that their coaches, again, made them seem like they were the problem, which I think if we believe in women's rights is something that we should take very, very seriously. We're going to be back with more Rising after this.